Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a deeply fascinating, albeit, intensely dark journey through human history. We're going to unpack the architecture of human conflict. We'll be looking at the brutal origins of ancient empires, the mechanized horrors of the 20th century, and the catastrophic political lies that literally doomed millions. Our goal today is to really understand the mechanisms of power and the devastating cost that almost always accompanies it.
I mean, it's the ultimate cold open question, isn't it? Does human ambition always end in blood? From ancient conquerors all the way to modern dictators, the pursuit of absolute power leaves this distinct, tragic footprint. So today we are going on a fast-paced investigation to see exactly how these massive engines of destruction are built, how they operate, and ultimately how they fall apart.
Okay, let's dive into this. Part 1. The Blood of Rome. From Swords to Collapse.
Think about Rome for a second. Its entire existence was basically defined by conflict. Look at its very beginning in 753 BC. Rome was literally founded on fratricide. Romulus murdered his twin brother Remus over a petty dispute about where to build a wall. And from that bloody start, the Republic spent the next several centuries expanding through just relentless military conquest. That is, until 27 BC, when Augustus usurped total power, ended the Republic, and forged an empire. But, as you'll see further down the timeline, that military dominance, it wasn't invincible, and it eventually led to its ultimate collapse in 476 AD.
To really get Rome's aggressive DNA, you have to look at who actually built it. Romulus declared early Rome an asylum city. He just opened the gates to runaway slaves, debt dodgers, criminals, and exiles. It was a chaotic, incredibly desperate demographic. And because this rugged population was entirely male, they literally solved their gender imbalance by organizing a festival and kidnapping the women of their neighboring tribe, the Sabines. This hardwired a culture of aggressive survival and militarism right into the very foundation of the city.
So for centuries, Rome seemed completely unstoppable, until you hit this chilling number, 3. In 980, 3 entire professional Roman legions, we're talking over 20,000 highly trained men, were completely slaughtered in the Teutoburg forest. They were ambushed by Germanic tribes led by Arminius, a man Rome actually thought was their trusted ally. This staggering defeat proved that the Roman war machine could be outsmarted, and it permanently halted their expansion into Germania.
But the final fall of the Western Roman Empire wasn't some glorious, decisive battlefield defeat. Actually, it was more like a slow suffocation. In the late 4th century, the terrifying Huns pushed tens of thousands of Goth refugees right to the Roman borders. Rome granted them asylum, sure, but deeply corrupt Roman officials exploited and starved these refugees. Pushed to the absolute brink, the Goths revolted, entirely destroying a Roman army. This shattered the psychological border of the empire. It led to an era of endless concessions, culminating in the Visigoths and Vandals repeatedly sacking the city of Rome itself. It was death by unmanageable migration and internal corruption.
Which brings us to a terrifying pivot point. Because if an empire as grand as Rome could be suffocated by swords and spears, what on earth happens when humanity scales up its ambition and invents the machine gun, the tank, and the artillery shell?
Part 2. The Mechanized Slaughter. Welcome to the trenches.
Just look at this domino effect from 1914 to see how quickly the world caught fire. It starts with one nationalist assassin shooting Archduke Franz Ferdinand. That triggers Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia. But then the alliance system immediately kicks in. Russia mobilizes to protect Serbia. Germany jumps in to back Austria and attacks France by plowing through neutral Belgium. And that blatant invasion, it forces Britain into the fight. In a matter of weeks, a localized assassination dragged the entire globe into a catastrophic war.
Now, there was a massive, tragic gap between expectation and reality here. Young men marched off so enthusiastically expecting a quick, glorious war won by rapid maneuvering and heroic cavalry charges. They thought they'd be home by Christmas, but the reality was utterly paralyzing. The conflict bogged down into a stagnant, horrific line of trenches stretching all the way from the North Sea down to Switzerland. Millions of men would die over the next 4 years just to move the line a few miserable meters.
And because neither side could break those trenches, they desperately tried to innovate. They basically industrialized death. Soldiers were ordered over the top into no man's land, running directly into machine gun fire. They endured hours of relentless, deafening artillery shelling that caused mass PTSD, which they called shell shock back then. We saw the introduction of horrific poison gas clouds.
the terrifying debut of the first armored British tanks, and global starvation tactics, like Britain's massive naval blockade that slowly choked Germany of resources. The result of this mechanized stalemate? 40 million. Just let that massive number sink in for a moment. 40 million total global casualties, dead and wounded. An entire generation fed into a meat grinder over an intricate web of alliances and imperial pride. So surely, right? Surely after witnessing 40 million casualties, humanity learned its lesson. Could the next era finally be built on genuine promises of peace? Or would those promises just be weaponized? Let's transition from the physical trenches of the First World War to the profound psychological manipulation that caused the Second.
Part 3. The Dictator's Deadly Lies. Words that Killed Millions.
Take a look at this quote from Adolf Hitler in his 1940 Reichstag speech. He says, "This war was forced upon us. We showed unprecedented and truly superhuman self-control." It's this grand, sweeping claim of pure victimhood. He actively framed his violent expansion as a defensive struggle for freedom. But we are going to shatter this illusion right now with the cold historical truth.
Let's systematically dismantle this narrative. Hitler claimed he wanted a peaceful revision of post-World War I treaties. But reality shows he aggressively rearmed in 1935, seized the Rhineland in 1936, and annexed Austria in 1938. His claim of superhuman self-control entirely debunked by the Gleiwitz incident. That was a false flag attack where SS troops literally dressed up as Polish soldiers to fabricate an excuse to invade Poland. And his boast of unlimited raw materials? He was desperately reliant on Soviet fuel and Swedish iron. It was all a calculated, aggressive expansion built on blatant falsehoods.
But here's the thing. Hitler's lies were amplified by the naivety of others. Here is British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in 1938, right after handing over the Sudetenland to Hitler in the Munich Agreement. He triumphantly declared that this settlement is only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace. He essentially believed that giving a dictator exactly what he demanded would satisfy him.
Well, handing Hitler what he wanted absolutely did not bring peace. No way. It directly enabled a power vacuum and a global war that ultimately killed roughly 85 million people worldwide. Appeasement didn't stop the march of destruction, it accelerated it.
But Hitler wasn't the only dictator hiding atrocities behind utopian language. Look at Joseph Stalin in 1936, boasting about his new Soviet constitution. The new Soviet constitution guarantees complete equality of rights. Freedom of speech and of the press is fully secured. I mean, it sounds incredible, right? A true workers' paradise? But let's look at the brutal contrast.
This so-called victory of socialism was written entirely in blood. Freedom of speech? The press was strictly state-controlled, and criticizing the party literally earned you a bullet to the neck. Freedom of religion? Over 40,000 churches were closed and priests were exiled or shot. Stalin claimed an end to exploitation, yet he ran a gulag system where 1.5 million people died performing slave labor. The society was paralyzed by informant networks. During the Great Terror of 1937 and 1938, regional quotas dictated the murder of citizens, resulting in roughly 1,000 people executed every single day. At the time, it was the biggest self-inflicted massacre of the 20th century, at least until a few decades later.
Which brings us to Chairman Mao Zedong in China. In 1958, he launched the Great Leap Forward, hoping to industrialize China practically overnight. His seemingly simple slogan was, "Steel is the key. Without steel, we can't build socialism." Now that sounds like a standard industrial rallying cry, but implementing this lie caused absolute devastation.
Because they lacked actual industrial infrastructure, citizens were forced to melt down their own pots, pans, and crucial farming tools in these backyard furnaces. And it didn't even produce steel. It produced useless, brittle slag. Meanwhile, local officials were so terrified of displeasing Mao that they faked record agricultural harvest numbers. Based on these massive lies, the government seized non-existent grain from the people. And if you tried to speak the truth, even Mao's own defense minister, you were purged as a traitor. Fear completely destroyed the agricultural foundation of the country. And the apocalyptic consequence of forcing an entire nation to live a lie? Up to 45 million innocent people starved to death in just 4 years, between 1958 and 1962. That is more dead than the entirety of the First World War, all due to the terrifying combination of absolute power and systemic deceit.
And that brings us to the end of our explainer. We've traced this blueprint of devastation from the blood-soaked swords of Roman expansion, through the mechanized slaughter of the World War I trenches, all the way to the catastrophic, reality-bending lies of 20th century dictators. The methods change, for sure, but the devastating cost of unchecked power remains exactly the same. So the question we have to leave you with today is this: looking at our modern world, have we finally learned to recognize this architecture of ruin? Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep asking questions and keep learning.